Welcome to the Risk Management course. I'm Dr. Bill Perkins. Today we're going to be exploring Chapter 7, Information Systems Security. This lecture is based on material from the textbook Business Continuity and Risk Management Essentials of Organizational Resilience by Kurt Engemann and Douglas Henderson. So we're going to get started. And these are the objectives for Chapter 7. First, we're going to examine the security of IT assets of an organization. Next, we're going to characterize threats to IT assets. Then we're going to review the control of IT assets in a systematic way. Then we're going to examine audit objectives and control objectives. And we're going to describe substantive tests and compliance tests. We're going to describe presenting material findings to executive management. Then we're going to review operating systems and system software security. We're going to define application security, database security, and network security. We're going to review mobile devices and security. Then we're going to examine the growth of social networking. A useful way of implementing controls in any situation is to view them as a multi-layered process of controls. So in the first instance, we try to prevent an incident from happening that would breach a system. Often, most controls are set up like this and, with layers. And unfortunately, an adversary is able to penetrate a system and, if successful, has free reign over target areas. Now, to counter this possibility, controls are in place to detect a breach in the system. So in this manner, if a perpetrator gains access, we're able to know that something improper has occurred. And finally, the provision must be made to correct the problem resulting from the breach to that part of the system. So these layers, preventive, detective, and corrective, form the basis of layering controls on a particular information technology asset to be protected. So controls are, in accordance with this textbook, and for our purposes in this chapter, are layering processes and characterizing threats to IT assets. So that's essentially what we do. It's like a multi-layered approach to mitigate the risks associated with these threats. And that's essentially what a control is. So in this section, we discussed several concepts that form the basis of understanding some of the primary ways for an organization to think about control. It is convenient and effective way to view controls from a very simple perspective. Now, there is a fundamental statement of the control, which is followed by a discipline over that control. An example would be the control to keep all doors locked. That would be the basic control statement discipline. However, unless an auditor verifies that the doors are indeed locked, then there is no compliance with that basic control statement. It is the surrounding control that makes it effective. Merely stating the control is never enough. So remember, when implementing a useful approach to control, layering is an effective approach due to the developed capacity to prevent an incident, detect a breach, and prevent a problem. Now, there are many design principles that must be considered in designing an effective control system, and these include requisite variety, redundancy, granularity, protocols and standards, encryption, and trust. In implementing any control system for a targeted asset, it is imperative to understand the nature of any exposure. On some occasions, your concern could be disclosure of the state of a particular asset. An example would be the balance in a bank account or the fact that a person knows that an alarm to an area in an inactive mode at a point in time. Okay, so knowing that that alarm system is in an inactive mode would be risk to that asset. Other times, the exposure is an asset that could be modified. Examples would be a perpetrator could change the direction of an inquiry to a dangerous website, or when a firewall is set to an off mode unbeknownst to the organization. So, a third type of exposure would be when the intent is to destroy an asset, and the goal is destruction, and it could be as large as an entire intranet of a corporation to something as minor as the contents of a person's hard drive on their computer. In order to facilitate the creation of a control system and its efficacy, we could follow a straightforward process. There are many names given to this exercise and many variations of it, but we present the following as one of many operations to inform our actions. It makes little sense to insert controls at that are as random in the system. This action can result in inefficiencies, poor control, and wasted expense and frustration on the part of the system's users. Now, the first step is to systematically attempt to identify the types of breaches in the system that might occur. Examples could be a fire, robbery, or etc. Could be anything. The next step is to ascertain at what point in the system, a control point that is, there should be a control inserted. Okay, so again, this control could be any one of the three types discussed previously: is preventive, detective, or corrective. Now, the auditor must be assured that these controls are in place as part of a formal audit. So finally, depending upon the importance of the audit target, a step-by-step approach must be designed to perform the audit in an expeditious manner. Now we're going to talk about information systems auditing considerations, and we'll touch on audit objectives and control objectives, substantive tests and compliance tests, and statement of audit findings. Now, there is a very simple process that an auditor follows when on a site visit. It involves asking a series of questions and reflecting on answers to them. The questions are as follows: who, what, when, where, why, how, and which. However, an audit is far more complex than simply asking a few basic questions and reporting the results. The auditor must be guided by a clear control objective and audit objective, or countless resources will be wasted. Now, each audit has a control objective. Its purpose is to ensure that an asset is properly protected at the desired level. So in order to ascertain this state, the auditor establishes a specific audit objective. Now, the ultimate purpose of the audit objective is to be able to determine whether or not the control objective has been met. So it should be noted that a control objective might be financial in nature. For example, are assets properly valued? Or non-financial in nature. For example, is data archived? Or operational in nature. For example, is the facility properly secured? Now, the audit objective eventually is translated into an audit program that is drilled down to the audit steps necessary to carry out the actual site audit. Now, typically, the auditor performs tests on a targeted system, and these tests are either substantive or compliance in nature. A substantive test is a test of data values and usually involves accessing a company's database and verifying balances contained therein. Emphasis is placed on material values and not always a direct enumeration of all the data. A compliance test is one that is concerned with a review of operations with the purpose of rendering an opinion or whether or not a proper policy or procedure is followed at a data center. So in this chapter, we are concerned only with the compliance testing of the controls in place at the physical site and not any data contained within databases. The Institute of Internal Auditors, IIA, has developed a series of guidelines that are to be followed in presenting the audit results to corporate management in a concise and standardized manner. As part of an audit review, the auditors are expected to follow these guidelines in presenting their audit findings as a result of their site visits to the data center. So each audit finding is documented and then prioritized in terms of risk exposure to the organization. The following 5 points constitute the architecture of the audit findings framework. First, we have the statement of condition, and this contains the factual or observed evidence of the current state. It can be thought of as the what was part of the report. Second, we have the criteria. This is our reference point or standard or protocol that is used to measure against the current condition observed by the auditor. Third is the effect, preferably stated with a monetary value. It represents the degree of risk or exposure incurred as a result of the deviation from the standard. Fourth is the cause. This is the auditor's opportunity to explain why there is a deviation from the stated standard. Often this is a result of someone not performing their assigned duties, but can also be the result of no one person being held responsible for an entity. Now, our fifth and final point is the recommendation. And this is the opportunity for the auditor to state to management what actions could be taken to rectify the identified exposure. So in other words, what do we do now, or what to do now? Over the next slides, we discuss various information technology applications using concepts discussed earlier in this lecture. And that is your applications involving national security require what is referred to as trusted systems, and most businesses implement general purposes operating systems that, although have some degree of security, are not intended to possess an inordinate level of security. Well, every computer system has an operating system that serves to handle major tasks that enable applications to be processed. Now, the degree of security of any operating system is something that can be engineered by an organization to ensure that the appropriate level of trust is achieved. Applications involving national security require what is referred to as trusted systems. Most businesses implement general purpose operating systems that, although having some degree of security, are not intended to possess an inordinate level of security. And since the major purpose of any operating system is to control the processing of tasks, it is important to understand that most of the work carried out by the operating system is out of sight of most computer users, and often the end user interfaces with the operating system when they sign on the computer. Now, the operating system manages the functions of identification, authentication, and authorization for all end users. Now, for most applications, this involves the use of a login, name, and password, and the operating system contains a table created by the data manager to verify that the person trying to access the computer is indeed a valid user. And a serious security threat to any operating system occurs when unauthorized users gain access to the computer. So once inside the computer, peculiar activities such as malware could wreak havoc with valid organizational activities. Now, with the growth of the internet, attacks on operating systems have proliferated. The information on vulnerabilities of certain operating systems is widely available and shared across national boundaries. Certain people have as their objectives financial gain, whereas others are simply out to disrupt the operations of the business. So most operating systems have embedded security modules, whereas older systems had to rely on external modules that were purchased separately. In most organizations, there is a specialist whose responsibilities are to manage all aspects of the operating system, and they set security parameters commensurate with the specific objectives of the organization. One of their most important tasks is to ensure that all current upgrades are installed in a timely manner. The number of patches required varies with the discovery of serious security or operating flaws detected by users in the field. Another task is to back up all files on servers in a timely manner and to test the recovery policies that have been established by management. So some organizations function in a 24/7 environment and they cannot afford to have any universal system downtime. Now, the ultimate goal of the systems manager is to harden the system so that it is resilient to attacks and can keep the organization functioning in an effective and efficient manner. The principal means to secure operating systems is through real-time monitoring and use of events logs. Now, the latter is the after-the-fact control that allows systems managers to look for breaches in the system and to track any patterns that might be an indication of abuse. Now, the major purpose of using computers is to perform useful work, and this is done by application software referred to as apps. And in large organizations, applications are designed by systems analysts and designers. Typically, some form of project management techniques are employed to manage costs and time, as well as the quality of the finished product. With the advent of microcomputers, more development work was delegated to the end users, whose task it was to build spreadsheets, document generation, databases, and presentations. These applications are executable programs that perform many tasks required by the organization. If care is not taken to make certain that the programs are secure, then serious breaches can occur in the security of the organization. Now, these application programs provide windows into the company's nerve center. They often use existing files and provide reports and analysis to management at all levels of an organization that is used daily for decision making. If proper security procedures in developing these applications are not taken, then the quality of decision making could be seriously compromised. Now, for example, a spreadsheet program has embedded within itself to perform calculations accurately, present attractive graphics, and to prepare attractive looking reports. However, there is no guarantee that the developer is using the data properly. Bad data and bad analysis are major security risks for any organization that uses computers to support its decision making. So therefore, it is incumbent upon any organization to properly train application developers in the rudimentary principles of control and security if they are charged with supporting the organization decision-making processes. A runaway application could alter system resources and have far greater impact than its own local application. So a final concern with applications is the management of changes to any system. Only authorized users should be allowed access to an application and be given the ability to make changes to it. Well, once the need is established for a change to an application, someone must authorize the change. And the change to the application must be thoroughly tested and, if acceptable, it should be properly documented and then implemented. So, in large organizations, there is a formal change configuration process in place. However, in smaller organizations, changes to applications are often done in a very informal manner, thus increasing the security risk from any changes made by end users. So, a recent study identified 5 threats to the most dangerous programming errors as the most dangerous programming errors. The first one is cross-site scripting. Second is SQL injection. Third is classic buffer overflow. Fourth is cross-site request forgery. And the fifth being improper access control. And in discussing database security, we must take 2 different perspectives. The first perspective is that of the database creator or designer. So in setting up the database, one must determine who has access and how people will have access to the data, who will update the data, and which constituent owns the data. Since the database administrator is responsible for securing the data, many organizational questions must be addressed. Now, some of these are technical and some are political. The primary concern of the administrator is efficiency in design that translates into rapid access, retrieval speeds, and low overhead on the system. Now, it is helpful to think of databases as an important link in processing transactions. So these transactions are created by applications and during their existence often become a component of a database. Now, while residing in the database, they can be modified or updated and undergo various transformations. At some point, they are archived, and this creation to an archived life cycle, from being created to being archived, is essentially a life cycle. So, if you will, it sometimes is referenced metaphorically as the birth to death, and it emphasizes the importance of maintaining audit trails of all activities affecting a database. And the database administrator is the custodian of the data as it moves through each stage of materialization in that life cycle or that life of that transaction. Federal laws dictate how long certain business data must be maintained. However, some companies may choose to archive their data for longer periods of time. Now, the second perspective belongs to the end user. Typically, they are not aware of the behind-the-scenes technical issues. They are concerned with efficacy of the user interface. So the end user accesses the database in a natural language interface by a series of queries. The power of the particular database system determines the extent of the functionality that is available to the users. Access for each person is predetermined and entered into the system by the database administrator. Now, security is enforced via a user sign-on procedure, and the complexity of the password rubric employed contributes to the quality of security. Passwords should be ranked on a scale from weak to strong. Now, to understand network security, one must be aware of the various exposures and where they occur. Network standardization is facilitated via the Open Systems Interconnect, or OSI. It's a 7-layer model which encompasses the application layer. Second, you have your presentation layer. Third, you have your transport layer. Fourth, you have your network layer. Fifth, you have your data link layer. Six is the physical layer. Let's stand by 1 second here. I'm missing a layer. and you have your open systems layer. This model allows various forms of security to be implemented at each level of the conceptual model. Security controls can be placed on the physical layer all the way to the application layer discussed earlier in this presentation. Now, in practice, the more familiar TCP/IP model, second here. I'm just going to scroll another slide. Okay. So, in practice, the more familiar TCP/IP model is the basis for internet activity, and one term that many end users are somewhat familiar with as they interact with wider networks in practice. So the TCP/IP model is composed of 4 layers, being the application layer, transport layer, internet layer, and network access layer. So you could think of it as a mapping to the conceptual design of the OSI model. Now, behind the scenes of the network activity lies a host of technical decisions, not the least of which are security concerns. And these networks can be local area networks, otherwise known as LANs, to wide area networks, WANs, and can be called intranets, which are within organizations, or internet, which is a public network, as you know. The networks can be wired or wireless. Each choice involves complex security trade-offs for network designers. And every network must have a design level of reliability so that organizations can function in a global environment with an expected level of service to its customers. Therefore, choices in technology must be made regarding pathways the data will transverse. Will the data channels be public or private, you may ask. Now, will they be secured or unsecured? Will there be a single control center, or will the control be disrupted across several computers? So the network designers must determine a network that contains redundancies in the event one channel is out of service or compromised. Now, in certain cases, an organization might want to utilize a public network, but want a high level of built-in security. In order to satisfy this requirement, virtual private networks, or VPNs, were created. This process is effective in that the end user initiates contact with the internet as a first step. Then, via a client software program, the user's data is encrypted at the sending location, and this encrypted data is then transmitted over the public internet until it arrives at its target destination. And at that location, a VPN switch is utilized to decrypt the transmission and forward it to another user in the corporate network. A good way to understand this process is by means of a metaphor. So the message is loaded into an armored car, a process referred to as encapsulation, and that car passes through a private, secured, and encrypted data tunnel that has been carved out virtually through the superhighway, which is the internet. So each designer must select the appropriate level of security to achieve the organization's security goals, and these policies range from the use of static passwords all the way up to dynamic passwords and digital certificates or signatures. And once taken from legitimate owners, they can be used to target an organization's information assets. So unless proper protection is taken, like encryption of device contents and robust sign-on procedures, the holder of these devices could have a straight shot into the company's assets. So one way to think about security for mobile devices is to appreciate the fact that these devices are actually computers, and as such should be taken as seriously as another corporate computer, whether it is a desktop or laptop. So it is good security practice to educate all users of wireless mobile devices about the specific security risks inherent within these devices. So in addition to end user education, IT can also implement practices such as password management, auto disable, and remote wipe, as well as centralized encryption. And over the years, there has been continued growth in the number of social networking sites and users of those services around the world. So, members of these services provide personal data to the systems in exchange for the ability to communicate with a larger community. Now, there are numerous security issues inherent to using these systems for personal use, but the risks increase dramatically when they become part of a corporate enterprise. So there are several features that have been added to these sites on a continuous basis over the years, in addition to traditional messaging and photo sharing, and the ability to combine GPS technology to the social networking site. This process is called check-ins. So by combining the two capabilities, a person is able to discern the location of a person that they were communicating with. Businesses have recognized the revenue generating potential by tying in advertisements and other promotional opportunities. From a security perspective, organizations are finding it increasingly problematical to keep their employees off these sites during work hours, resulting in a significant loss of productivity. So there is also the concern that corrupted data can enter a system via interactions with outsiders who wish to do harm. The obvious security policy is to issue a corporate ban on using these sites during work hours. However, a conflict emerges when the organization itself is a corporate user of that social networking site. And Twitter is an excellent example of this. There's been a lot of companies that have been jammed up, while using Twitter, in their own social networking feed, whether it be advertisements or info sharing, that, employees also as agents of the organization, tend to integrate their own, personal accounts, and it becomes part of the organization's branding. So its employees, the employees must monitor the site on a continuous basis to make sure that that's not happening. Now, in conclusion, the concepts of controls and auditing IT assets have been highlighted, and these topics have provided a framework that can be implemented by any organization that has an interest in determining a unique approach to securing its information assets. So after discussing these important considerations, various components of security and controls were presented. Now, the challenge for any organization that wants to protect its information technology assets is to indoctrinate it within its employees a fundamental awareness and vigilance towards security. So this process starts with new hires, essentially new people you hire, and is reinforced on a daily basis through socialization and organizational cultural aspects and strategy. So as end users clamor for ease of use, it is critical that a company balance its security concerns with enhanced productivity tools that do not compromise the economic viability of the enterprise. And that concludes our Chapter 7 lecture. Make sure you visit Blackboard for the Chapter 7 expectations and deliverables, and I will see you in Chapter 8.